Good afternoon, everyone. This is meeting number 55 of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, Wednesday, May 3rd, 2017. I'll remind the committee again that we are televised, and so if you would mind muting your Blackberries or your telephone communication items, that would be greatly appreciated to those in the audience and also to committee members. Today we are conducting a hearing on Report 5, Canadian Armed Force Recruitment and Retention, National Defence from the Fall 2016, reports of the Auditor General of Canada. Appearing as witnesses today we have Mr. Michael Ferguson, the Auditor General of Canada, and Mr. Gordon Stock, Principal. Welcome. Also from the Department of National Defence, Mr. John Forster, the Deputy Minister, as well. He has brought other personnel to assist him. So I understand that each of our witnesses today has an opening statement, and I invite the Auditor General to begin. Madam
Mr. Chair,
Mendez, first.
If I may, before we proceed, and apologies to the witnesses, j'aimerais apporter until you put your piece on. No, this is for you, so you'd better.
Okay.
Désolé.
Sorry. I would like to bring to your attention the leak in the media about the spring report from the Office of the Auditor General that was leaked yesterday to CBC. I wanted you, Mr. Chair, to verify what happened and to come back with us with some information for the next meeting.
The committee, I do appreciate the fact that this was brought forward by our committee members to me, and it was checked out. Typically what happens when the Auditor General reports, he will be reporting on the 16th of May. We know that is coming. Those reports are tabled in the House of Commons the very same day. But on occasion, the Auditor General's office does special reports. And the special report is somewhat different in the tabling process. That is, the special report is made public on the website and tabled at a later date. So my understanding is, if I am correct, my understanding here is that the report that was quoted from was indeed one of these special reports, and the report had already been on the website. Now I see our Auditor General, who's also more capable than I to answer that question. Mr. Ferguson.
Yeah, just to be clear, and I assume the reference is to the special examination of Defence Construction Canada.
Yes.
And under the Financial Administration Act, we do special examinations of Crown corporations, and we have to do a special examination of each Crown corporation once every 10 years. The special examinations that we do are reports under the Financial Administration Act, and we are required to report to the Board of Directors of the Crown Corporation. Okay, so our process with those is not tabling them in the House of Commons. Our process is to provide those to the Board of the Crown Corporation. The Board then has a certain period of time, I've forgotten how long it is, 30, 60 days, something like that, to make it public. The special examination was delivered to Defence Construction Canada in January, so they had a certain amount of time to make it public. Or actually, it was made public in January, so we would have delivered it to them, I guess, before that. So, what we do is we still table the special examinations with the House of Commons to make sure that you are aware of them. Okay, so in the case of those special examinations, which are different than our performance audits because the mandate is under the Financial Administration Act, and our requirement is to report them to the Board of Directors, but we still table them to make sure that you are aware of them and so that you can hold hearings on them. So that report was made public back in January, legitimately made public back in January according to the Financial Administration Act.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Just one more point, and then I'll go into your presentation today. But Mr. Christofferson very quickly.
Thanks, Chair. I think the reason that it came to our attention the way it did is because the process has been in place for some time, but normally there isn't media on it, and the fact that there was suddenly media before we saw it kind of caught us all off guard. But my question is this, Chair. You did mention towards the end, Mr. Ferguson, that it could be subject to a public hearing by us. The only thing I wanted to ask you was, you're very, very familiar now with our procedures and our routines and how we conduct and go about choosing chapters, etc. And it's very different, of course, because of the procedure that unfolds when you table your full report. My question would be, and you don't have to answer it right now, is are there any recommended changes that you would make to that process? In other words, do you see a deficiency in that process as opposed to what we normally do with your reports? Because I have to tell you, they don't come to us in that same fashion, because they're public first, and so they're very different. And I wonder, do you think there's any need for us to look at trying to align them up a little more so that we don't have this uniqueness, or is that uniqueness justified and this is just fine the way it is, in your opinion?
Well, I guess what it is it's how the process is defined under the legislation. Right. So I guess that's really up to Parliament to decide if Parliament would rather have that done in a different way. But the idea of the special examinations is that what we are doing in those cases is we are going in and we're looking at the systems and practices of that Crown Corporation, and we're reporting to that board of that Crown Corporation whether there are any significant deficiencies in their systems and practices. So the special examinations around Crown Corporations was designed as reporting to the board about their systems and practices, but putting a requirement on the board for them to make the report public. Now, the other thing, though, that I should mention to you is on May 16th, we will be including 3 special examinations. One of them, again, the time period is such that the Crown Corporation will probably make it public just shortly before May 16th. So there may be another one that you will hear about before, the actual tabling on May 16th. What we used to do was we used to just provide a summary of the special examinations. Recently, we've gone to providing you with the full special examination to make sure that you're aware of all of the issues. So I think the fact that recently we started giving you that special examination as the complete report, and it looks like all of our other performance audits, is probably a little bit about what's causing some of the confusion, because this practice has been going on ever since special examinations were put into the Financial Administration Act. The practice of us preparing them, reporting them to the board of the Crown Corporation, the board making them public, and then what we did in the past was we would just do a small chapter that said, by the way, over the past year, we had issued special examinations on the following Crown Corporations, and just give you a very, just the summary of it. Whereas over the last probably year and a half, we've started providing you with the full special examination, so they look like full chapters. So in terms of sort of your question about, should it change or not, I mean, again, right now, it's a report that's done for the board, presented to the board. The idea of the board having to make it public within a certain period of time is so that, it doesn't take a year to make it public. I mean, I don't have any particular complaints about that. I think that's more whether, as parliamentarians, that you're satisfied with that process.
Very good. Thank you, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for the clarity on that. But we will now go into our issue of the day, if you want to call it that. And so, first of all, I will welcome Mr. Ferguson's comments in regards to the question that we look at today on recruitment and retention. Mr. Ferguson.
Thank you. Monsieur le Président, je vous remercie.
Mr. Chair, thank you for this opportunity to discuss our 2016 fall report on Canadian Armed Forces recruitment and retention. Joining me today is Gordon Stock, the principal responsible for the audit.
How National Defence had recruited, trained, and retained the regular force members it needed. Overall, we found that the regular forces had about 4,200 fewer fully trained members than they needed. Although the regular force had determined the number of recruits it needed, its recruiting plans and targets were reduced to fit National Defence's capacity to process applications and train new members. National Defence met its overall reduced recruiting target in 2016. However, it accomplished this by exceeding enrollment targets for some occupations while leaving other occupations short-handed. We also found that the Canadian Armed Forces had set 25% as its target for women in its ranks, but that its recruiting efforts only maintained the representation of women at 14%. Furthermore, about half of the women in the regular force were concentrated in 6 occupations. In a number of instances, we found that the Canadian Armed Forces recruiting process did not fit the needs of applicants and caused delays. Examples included delays for medical screening and delays for assessing whether applicants' previous education could reduce their training requirements. In some cases, National Defence closed files and lost qualified candidates who were still interested in enrolling. Maintenir en poste de personnel.
Retaining qualified and effective personnel reduces the demand for and costs of recruiting and training new members. In the 2015-2016 fiscal year, almost 1/4 of occupations had attrition rates higher than 10%. In 2009, National Defence developed a retention strategy, but never fully implemented it. At the time of our audit, the Canadian Armed Forces planned to develop a revised retention strategy by June 2018. In our 2002 and 2006 audits, we found similar problems. These included setting recruiting targets lower than the needs and having no comprehensive plan to attract more applicants, especially for chronically understaffed occupations. We believe that without significant changes to recruiting, the Canadian Armed Forces will not have the member it needs in the future. We made 7 recommendations in our audit report. National Defence has responded that it agrees with each of the recommendations and is in the process of addressing a number of them.
We'd be pleased to answer any questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you to our Auditor General, and we'll now move to Mr. Forster, the Deputy Minister. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for having me back to speak to you and the members of the committee on the Auditor General's report number 5 pertaining to national defence. J'aimerais vous remarquerez que les nouveaux.
You'll notice that I'm accompanied here by some new faces today. Please allow me to introduce the Brigadier General, who has just been promoted to the Commander of Military Personnel, and also Brigadier General Stephen Whelan, Commander of Military Personnel Generation, Colonel Andre Demare, Commander Canadian Forces Recruiting Group, and Ms. Susan Truscott, Director General, Military Personnel Research and Analysis. Lieutenant General Lamar runs the team who makes all the recommendations contained in the report. We appreciate the work of the Auditor General to identify gaps in the Canadian Armed Forces efforts in terms of recruitment and retention. And we're committed to addressing his concerns.
With you our management action plan that addresses each of the recommendations. We are conducting an extensive review of our entire recruitment process to make it more timely and efficient, but we're not waiting for the review to be complete before we move forward. We've already used the Auditor General's recommendations to refocus our efforts and to improve the way we attract, select, and enroll new recruits and retain military personnel. And I can tell you personally that the management and care of our people in the armed forces is among the highest priorities of the Minister, the Chief of the Defence Staff, and myself. Key among these goals is to increase the representation of women to 25% of all Canadian Armed Forces members by 2026, 1% a year. Canada is a leader among NATO countries with respect to the number of women in our ranks, and one of the first to allow women to serve in all occupations. But we need and want to do more. We're at 15.2% female representation now. Not quite as low as the 14% quoted in the media in February, but not as high as we need. Encouragingly, the number of women who enrolled in the military was up 38% this past fiscal year, and the number of women in the Canadian Armed Forces increased by 0.3%, a small change, but the first positive growth in more than a decade. We've convened 3 working groups who will, over the summer, propose a way to increase these numbers more. First, with a strategic intake plan that sets realistic targets. Second, with branding, marketing, and targeted advertising strategies. And third, with ways to address barriers to recruitment. In the meantime, to help close the gap between 15 and 25%, we're fast-tracking the applications of qualified women to our military colleges. We're expediting the intake process for women who meet the entry standards. We're reaching out to women who started but did not complete the application process. We want to encourage them to reconsider joining. And of the 1,046 female applicants we've been able to contact so far, we've reopened files for 457 of them, and 96 are being processed for enrollment. That's about 9%. It's a good start, but we need to encourage more women to apply in the first place. In February and March, we ran advertising campaigns on Facebook and LinkedIn tailored to women in the military. The campaign highlighted the wide variety of interesting and exciting jobs in the armed forces and in civilian roles. It spoke to personal fulfillment, to the opportunity to help others, and to the ability to achieve work-life balance, acquire transferable skills, and receive paid education and training with salary. More campaigns are planned for this fiscal year to attract women and men of all backgrounds. Our goal continues to have Indigenous peoples make up 3.5% of the armed forces, and for visible minorities to make up 11.8%. We've doubled the number of visible minorities in the forces over the last 10 years, and we want to double it again. Because as the Minister and the Chief of the Defence Staff have said, diversity is our strength. We simply can't afford not to engage quality candidates. However, we do compete with employers across the country in specialized occupations such as doctors, engineers, social workers, and others in high demand. The recruitment of mental health professionals is especially difficult due to the short supply of psychiatrists, psychologists, mental health care nurses, and caseworkers. And the challenge is made greater by the demands associated with a military career. It's an exacting and sometimes hazardous profession. Realities such as deployment, separation from family, relocation, the general rigors of military life do not appeal to everyone, but we're not going to shy away from our task. We know we'll need to dedicate more financial and human resources to recruiting and training the required number of personnel for each occupation. We're putting in place measures to improve our 5-year recruitment planning and to ensure that adjustments can be made as needed to recruiting requirements for specific occupations. We're going to continue to launch advertising and marketing campaigns that raise awareness of the more than 100 different jobs and career choices in the armed forces. Attracting people's attention, sparking their interest, and finalizing their enrollment are three distinct tasks. We continue to improve and better target our advertising and marketing to get better at enrollment too. The Auditor General's report attributes a notable loss of applicants due to lengthy delays in recruiting, and we agree. In December 2016, we launched a 10-month pilot to streamline the intake and speed up enrollment of applicants into the Reserve Force, as well as for the Royal Canadian Navy, the Canadian Army, and the Royal Canadian Air Force. Our goal for the regular force is to enroll most new applicants within 60 to 90 days. For those that have complicated security or medical review demands, our goal is within 180 days. But once in, we need to have these recruits begin their basic training almost immediately. We've hired 26 military instructors to ensure they reach their operational functional point as soon as possible. And we're implementing a new system to decrease wait times for military training by occupation. To retain new members, we're creating a work environment that enables as much ease of movement as possible within the institution. For the primary reserves, we aim to process people within a matter of days, not months, so that we can meet our target of 28,500 primary reservists by the end of 2018-19. We're emphasizing to Canadians the reserves is a meaningful way to serve their country, even as they go to school or work in another job. There's no commitment to move, no obligation to deploy, and no long-term contract. Just a flexible schedule and the chance to train and serve close to your home. A career in the Canadian Armed Forces has its challenges, but as I'm sure Lieutenant General Lamar will attest, it's also one of the most rewarding work and life experiences available. In the 2 years I've had the privilege of being the Deputy Minister of National Defence, I've had the honor of working with many women and men in the armed forces, whether corporals, generals, members of the regular force, or reserves. The soldiers, sailors, and aviators I've met are proud of the work they do and the uniform they wear. Following the guidance of the Auditor General, we need to get that message out. And last year, the Armed Forces grew for the first time in 5 years. This year's results look even more promising. So I'm proud to help lead a defense team that is committed to being more inclusive, more diverse, and more qualified than ever. And I am confident that under the leadership of the Chief of Defense Staff, General Vance, and Lieutenant General Lamar, we will build the strength of and diversity of the forces even further. Thank you, and my colleagues and I will welcome any questions that you may have for us.
Thank you, sir. We'll now move into the first round of questions, which is a 7-minute round, and we'll begin with Ms. Mendez and Mr. Lefebvre.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for your presence here and for your statements. You've mentioned, Mr. Forster, that you are fast-tracking, or you're trying to fast-track enrollment, particularly for women. I think one of the issues the Auditor General found is that there's a very complicated process of documentation, and you're not digitalizing documents, just scanning documents and transferring them from office to office. Everything has to start anew once it moves from one office to the other. How are you addressing this issue? Because I think that's very discouraging for people to... Sorry? Yeah. Thank you very much.
I apologize. I'm having difficulties hearing your question. I'm not sure if we can adjust the volume somehow.
I would encourage you, beside you, you will see an earpiece and also a dial, and the dial gives you the volume and the station. So if you want it on the language used, you keep it on channel 4, and if you want it in English, channel 1, and typically if you want it translated to French, I believe it'd be channel 2. All right, Madam Mendez, can you please,
Thank
and
you.
we'll start your clock again.
Thank you very much. It's the whole question of the documents that people, well, new recruits have to provide in the process of enrollment. And from what we read in the Auditor General's report, there's a very complicated process when things move from one office to the other. You're not digitalizing documents to make them accessible through online. I mean, things being transferred from one office to the other online. Are you addressing this issue right now? Because I think that's one of the things that discourages new recruits, is the time it takes and having to provide documents or original documents anew. Is this something that you're addressing right now?
Thank you very much for the question. We're fortunate that we have the commander of the recruiting group with us here, Colonel Demers, and I'll turn the floor over to him in a second as well. One thing I can give as means of intro in the response to that question is the fact that there are a number of initiatives that have already been taken to simplify the recruiting overall, and that includes making sure that it's recruiting that can be done online and that the recruiting candidates themselves can actually track once their file is open online. Sometimes we are held to having to have original documents so we can actually confirm these are the accurate documents, but the intent each time is to make sure that we can speed up the process by which the applications are coming forward.
When did this start?
This has started actually for a while. I'll ask the commander of the recruit group to walk us through the documentation requirements and tell us how recently it's been put in place.
Merci.
Merci pour votre question.
For your question.
Your process, first of all, is attraction, then the actual processing, which you're referring to, selection, and then the enrollment process. With regards to the processing, there's four main sort of events that need to happen. The first one, well, five main events, and as part of attraction, is that the applicant needs to apply with us. And then once we start that dialogue with the applicant, he needs to show us some documents. That confirms his age, his citizenship, his schooling, and so on and so forth. That's usually a very fast process. Then we need to do what we call a CFAT, the Canadian Forces Aptitude Test, which tests cognitive ability of the applicant, which will give us an idea of the ability of the applicant to succeed with training, the basic training. We also need to do a medical process, which if the individual, the applicant, is good medically, that goes rather quickly, and then we can carry on the process. If there's any issue medically, then there's a back and forth between the medical chain and the applicant to see if we can proceed with the application or need to close the file. Once that is done, there's also a process where we need to ensure that the individual, the applicant, is reliable and grant him reliability status to make sure that he's got no criminal history, that his credit record is clean, and that we can check with his reference to make sure that he is a worthy individual to serve in the Canadian Forces.
Si vous me permettez, la question est plutôt sur...
If you wouldn't mind, the question is rather on the transfer of documents throughout the process, and the fact that, from what I can read in the auditor's report, there's no real digital process so that the documents don't have to be resubmitted every time. That's kind of what I'm getting at. Sorry, I did not understand your question correctly. Absolutely, yes. Right now, we have a program that's called CFRIMS 2.
Everything done in CFRIMS is done electronically. So all the documents, tous les documents sont de façon électronique.
All the documents are digital in the system. We also have, at the same time, paper copies of the documents to make sure nothing's lost, but everything is available electronically through CFRIMS, and we continue to improve the program to make sure we give applicants the chance to follow their process themselves on the web portal. I'm sorry, yes, so they can look at the web page to see where their file is. So we're moving increasingly towards electronic files, and the next stages of CFRIMS will also be actually getting rid of paper entirely and look just only using electronic documents. But this is a process. CFRIMS, yes, is already in place. The documents are scanned into the system, and you can follow your file electronically, but there's also still paper involved, but everything is implemented electronically. Thank you.
Well, if you'd be so kind, maybe in my turn, maybe add that 30 seconds to my time. Thank you. And I'll let my colleague.
On the next round?
Yeah, next round.
All right,
I'll go,
thank
yeah.
you, Mr. LaFive. Mr. Genereux, you have...
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for being here today. And Mr. Forster, thank you for attending 2 days in a row here. Just quickly want to clarify on page 4 of your comments, or sorry, page 5 of your comments, Mr. Forster, you mentioned that you want to meet the target of 28,500 primary reservists. Just for the record, can you clarify what you're at right now?
And just, if I can just have 1 second, consult the exact numbers we have. I believe it's around 20,000, but I'll have to undertake to come back and give you the accurate picture of the exact numbers today.
Okay, perfect. We'll work with 20,000 then for now. So like any organization that has a high level of stress and public scrutiny, curious about your comments on staff morale, and do you have any specific programs in place that help raise staff morale? I guess where it's at now and what type of programs you'd have.
Are you talking staff morale in one specific organization or in the Canadian Armed Forces as a whole?
Yeah, you guys are here in front of me, so let's do Canadian Armed Forces.
Okay. I would say to you that the morale in the Canadian Armed Forces is actually quite good. I'm not sure if you're referring to a specific incident or...
Okay, so fair enough.
Roger that. So programs to maintain, you're looking at how we're looking quality of life perhaps and to assist those pieces?
Yeah, like let's say something, again, it's a high stress job. I think you'd agree with me with that. There's a lot of public scrutiny involved as well. So what type of programs do you have available to individuals who would feel that morale is taking a bit of a hit? I'll take your answer that it's good now, but if there's certain programs in place.
So let me address that from a two-part way. First of all, we'll talk about the morale of the members, the uniformed members of the Canadian Armed Forces, and then after that I'll talk about the morales of the families, if you will. First and foremost, for the Canadian Armed Forces, what really helps to drive morale to keep it high is to having good, clear missions and having good training and having also good leadership. And I believe in all those areas we have that clearly identified for members of the Canadian Armed Forces. We now have members of the Canadian Armed Forces deployed on 19 missions around the world, including things such as Iraq and Kuwait, but also participating in the African continent, in the Middle East, and in Europe. And in each one of these things, they have a worthwhile mission that keeps them well employed, well occupied, where they make a difference. Secondly, it has to do with the quality of the training that we provide our men and women. It doesn't matter whether you're flying something or part of a crew that's flying something, or ships, or land formations, or any of the support occupations look after that. We put a high premium, high quality of training so that these individuals, these men and women, feel prepared for the jobs they do. And where we see this being received and received well is in how they're appreciated by the coalitions to which we belong. And any one of the coalition members that you have, or whether they be NATO organizations, are always grateful to have Canadian men and women in uniform being part of that. So that also drives the morale to where we go. On top of that, if you're looking at it, is also the leadership. We put a very high emphasis on development in our leaders. And that includes not only leaders in the officer corps, but also our non-commissioned members, our men. So right from the point of view of being at the corporal, master corporal, sergeants on up levels, we spend a tremendous amount of time developing those leadership skills. You take that combination with some good support programs, and next thing you have is a very high level of morale, in my opinion, for our men and women in uniform. Okay. If I can switch over to the families for a second, that's also something of great importance. You can say that it's something we've been putting a lot of emphasis on by putting in programs to support the families, whether it be recreational programs on bases or the military family resource centers. There's a tremendous amount of energy that is spent towards making sure we have that. I can't say that we're exactly where we want to be. As a matter of fact, the CDS and of course with the support of the DM is looking as well to make sure that our morale and welfare systems are well in place to support the families. That ensures to make sure that when we are moving families across Canada from posting to posting, that they're well supported in those moves, and we want to look to facilitating how those families are supported as they depart a location and also get themselves into their new locations. So if you have the combination of how we look after our members, how we look after our families, I'd say that we're putting forth a fair amount, actually a large amount of effort towards making sure that morale is good in the Canadian Armed Forces.
Great, terrific. So I was going to go down another line of questioning, but since we're talking about families and mobility, I understand that it's often a big part of the work that you do, that there's that mobility piece, that have to move across the country, and uprooting families and restarting their lives, often in different locations. Wondering if you know off the top of your head how many members choose to leave each year in order to avoid mobility obligations? Would you keep those statistics?
Susan, do we know if you have the specific statistics?
We don't have the specific reasons related to our exit release codes. Those would normally fall under voluntary releases. However, we do surveys, a YourSay survey every 6 months to assess morale and well-being. We do a family survey every 2 years, again to understand the complexities and challenges that they're facing. And we also have a retention survey, which is administered every 2 years, in addition to an exit survey. It is in the retention survey and the exit survey that you see, and the family survey, I should say, that you see some of the indications of why individuals leave the Canadian Forces.
And I have about 30 seconds left, so I'll try to quickly get this in. Do you do your best then to limit some of these mobility obligations? Is that part of a policy within the CAF?
There has been a move to make sure that we only make the moves when they're required for the individuals. And we found out a long time ago that you have geographical stability, it helps the family overall. That includes making sure that salaries aren't interrupted and those types of things. So there is an effort afoot to make sure that when you're moving people, it's for the right reasons. Career development and also filling key positions and appointments as required to make sure we can achieve our operations.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lamar. And now to Mr. Christofferson, please, for 7 minutes.
Great. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you all, Mr. Forster, thank you for returning, and to our guests also. We're doing 2 defense chapters just in 1 week, so normally I don't feel the need to do this, but it might just be a good time to insert the fact that the starting point for us is the respect and appreciation that the armed forces do. It's a difficult job, probably one of the most difficult in the entire nation, and there's a lot of respect for the work that you do. Our job is to work with you to make it even better for Canadians. So we want to start by saying thank you for the service. Having said that, yeah. Now, after 2 years, Mr. Forster, I think you know that nothing launches me anyway, and I think most of my colleagues, more than finding out that we're getting consistent audits over and over again that find exactly the same problems, and in many cases, many of the same promises to fix it, only to find out when there's another audit, the problems are still there. I refer you to page 1, under introduction, where at 5.5 the Auditor General says the Office of the AG conducted audits on the Canadian Armed Forces recruitment and retention in 2002 and 2006. Over the page, 5.6. Previous findings indicated ongoing systemic recruiting challenges for the regular force in its efforts to counter higher rates of attrition and fill certain chronically understaffed occupations. In fact, on page 3, the Auditor General flat out says, quote, "In our opinion, it is unlikely that the regular force will be able to recruit, train, or retain sufficient personnel to meet its target of 68,000 members by 2018-19. So, either the Auditor General is wrong, in which case I give you the floor to make that case, or you've got work to do and you don't quite yet know how you're going to do it, or you've got an ace answer that's going to satisfy all these concerns. But I'm going to tell you, the answer better be pretty good, because this is the third go-around on the same issue. And, sir, you know that when things are brought to you and it's still not fixed after 3 times, you would be getting a little upset. So I eagerly await your answer.
Forster.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the audit reports do show some systemic problems in recruitment. It's a challenge, and it has been a challenge, continues to be a challenge. I think there's some of the events that took place between this audit and the last one in particular. We went through 2 major deficit reduction exercises in the armed forces with an annual cut of about $2 billion. A major part of that reduction response was cuts to recruitment in the armed forces. We closed, I think, 13 different recruitment offices, cut 12 recruitment offices, cut back on staff, and we've paid a price for that. There's no question about that. And I think as our response to the Auditor General's findings show, we know we have to reinvest in those offices. We need about 40 new staff to process recruitment, and we're trying to find them. We will find the resources to do that. The chief has made. There's no point in us having a target of 68,000 and continuing to be 4,000 people short. And there are some reasons for that. Some of it is our capacity to recruit. Some of it, too, is, though, in some of the most difficult occupations, you are competing for a very scarce resource. And I think in my remarks I talked about that, doctors, psychiatrists, and so on. And I think they can provide you some more detail on that. But once we have them, too, then we need to retain them as much as possible. And by promising great careers and good training and good support, which was the earlier question. So we've laid out, I think, our action plan to find it. I think there's been some progress, but we know recruitment is an important part of what we need to do. And closing and cutting recruitment resources just makes the problem worse, not better. So I don't know, General, if you wanted to add anything.
Yeah, thank you, sir. If I can just give you an example of concrete numbers, the 12 recruiting centers that were cut that the Deputy Minister referred to result in a loss of 180 positions. And of course, those 180 positions are the types of people who would be involved in processing the specific files of the individuals who are recruiting. So you do have a net loss in your capacity of throughput to make this happen. As was alluded to in the opening comments, however, there's a recognition of that. And there are already some steps that are being taken care of. So there are some ways forward, if you will. By the middle of the month of June, we'll have 20 new career managers, file managers, who are going to be working for Colonel Demesse down in Borden, being hired specifically to look after the processing of files. He will be receiving another 20 of those by the end of the fiscal year to also increase the throughput. Within the Military Personnel Command, we also have the responsibility for basic training. So down at our school, the Leadership Recruit School in Saint-Jean, we are right now increasing their throughput capacity by the provision of 26 contracted instructors. And those ones specifically will be there to take on qualifications we must give to our incoming recruits, such as first aid and other types of skills like that, so that we can actually get forward and moving forward on these pieces. If I can just add one other point
quickly,
on it,
please.
and I know you got one. It's the idea to also say where we're putting incentives to bring in those hard-to-reach trades, including for doctors, where we're looking to provide significant cash incentives for when they're coming to join the Canadian Armed Forces.
Thank you. No, listen, I accept.
15 seconds. Go
Oh,
ahead.
Really? I got to learn. Every time I talk fast, though, the interpreters say they can't follow me. I'm stuck. Thanks very much. Thank you, Chair. I'll catch it in the next round.
All right. We'll come back to Mr. Lefebvre, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chair, thank you very much again for being with us here today, Mr. Forster. Like my colleague said, it's very worrisome to see that every time you come before a committee and you explain and tell us that things are going to change. and you say that things are going to change. But in the Auditor General's reports, in his comments today, it says that in 2002, 2006, there were the same problems with the 2016 audit. It says that you did not meet the needs, that there was not a complete plan for candidates, and that there was a chronic understaffing. If no major changes are made to recruitment, the Canadian Armed Forces will not have enough members to meet their needs in the future. So what major changes are you going to make, or what have you made? So from what I can see, you say you're making changes, but there haven't been any major changes, unless I'm incorrect. So please explain that to me. So I'll answer your question in two aspects in terms of recruitment, and then
And I'll start with the reserve force, first and foremost. We used to have a fairly long process that discouraged young Canadians who were trying to be part of the reserves. The Chief of Defence Staff was very adamant that we would change that and change it down so you could do the recruitment instead of taking multiple months to bring it down to a period of 30 days at the most. And that's right now what is being trialed in the East Coast and with some Air Reserve organizations. And it's being trialed with some success. It means that on that aspect, we're taking some risk in the aspects of looking at enhanced security clearance. But we're thinking that if we have a good solid police check and a credit check, then we can continue to start training these young men and women so we can actually get them in uniform and excited about what it is that they're going to do. That's one of the initiatives that we're doing that is significantly changing things. The other one as well that we're looking to do is significantly change how we're recruiting the regular force members as well, by going with electronic formats, but also by changing how it is that we attract them with much higher reliance, if you will, on social media. With the millennials that we have, it's no longer one of these large ad campaigns that you're going to see in newspapers, because most of them don't read it. However, the reach out that's occurring on a multitude of platforms for social media is significantly different. And on this particular one, we also need to move ahead faster so we can actually reduce the lag time for them to get interest in the Canadian Armed Forces. So that's in recruitment. Retention is probably one of the most important ones as well, because retention, if we can prevent young men and women from leaving the Canadian Armed Forces at various gates by making it more attractive, that'll be important for us. One of the key programs we're looking at doing right now is to facilitate the move between the regular and the reserve force. It used to be a complex process to make the transition, but now we want to make it as simple as a transition of a matter of a week or two after showing intent. And the reason by that is that this will be attractive to a lot of the population, whether it is that they're trying to satisfy linking up with spouses on other postings, or whether at the point in their life where they want to have families and concentrate more on raising the families and maybe parading some part-times. We want to make it so that we have the terms of service that will enable that. That's a significant change. So is the change as well of giving them the opportunity to make sure that they have the chance to take a break and come back without a penalty to how they're getting paid, and certainly with the opportunity to continue contributing to their pension fund so they can actually have a full career, but with the breaks in their careers necessary so they can raise their families, so they can achieve other things, for example, pursue another degree, and after that continue as a valued member of the Canadian Armed Forces, perhaps in very bespoke responsibilities and capabilities for which they have the training, for which there might be a short-term contract.
Merci pour ça. Puis je pense que ça.
Thank you for your answer. I think what you're saying will come to fruition, and these are very tangible members. You also said that your personnel was cut recently with 12 recruitment centers. I'm really happy about what you said, that there will be major changes. But do you have the necessary tools to meet these goals? It's good to have a plan and to carry it out, but do you have the necessary personnel to achieve your goals and the means?
To meet our deficit targets before, we closed recruitment centers. Bad idea, because now you've cut off a lot of the capacity you need to bring people in. So we're rebuilding that capacity. We're hiring more staff, as the General has mentioned. I think that's going to be critical. As he mentioned, our ad campaigns are getting much more targeted and focused on trades, on women, on visible minorities, so it's not a generic one-size-fits-all getting much more focused in who we're trying to reach and who we're trying to excite about a career.
Je vous ai demandé, avez-vous les ressources nécessaires?
I asked you, do you have the necessary resources and the necessary means to achieve?
Necessary, and we now have new leadership that will bring leadership to this file, and we have a good game plan to do that with a lot of work ahead of us. But it's not a question, I don't believe, of resources. We have technology, we have resources, we have tools, we have to get on with it.
So it's a question of what then? C'est quoi la question de voir, c'est de, comme tu dis, d'avancer?
So what's the problem? You have to just move ahead with your program? Like I said earlier, in 2002, 2006, and now 2016, we see similar reports in front of us from the Auditor General. So you can't blame us for being somewhat skeptical as to whether you'll be successful. We want you to be successful. But at the same time, this is not the first time you've come before us, and let's hope it's the last. It's interesting in terms of what you said about the reserves. There was a study done not too long ago, so I'm very happy to see that there will be more connection between recruitment with the reserves and the armed forces. Can you talk about this aspect, the importance of the reserves for the Canadian Army? So their importance is very clear. I'll give you a historical example that didn't happen too long ago. During the war in Afghanistan, we sent some 1,000 members. So they were roughly 20% of these people who were reserve members, and this increased.
Who were trained up and came and joined the battle group and went through the training, you cannot make the difference between the two of them. But those numbers were essential for us to be able to maintain the mission we have. So there is no doubt that our reservists are essential for the kind of work we do. And of course, there's always the intent to make sure that they have really good hands-on roles that are effective and essential for when we're doing deployed operations or even domestic operations in Canada.
Thank you very much. Very quickly, we've given him his extra time. Very quickly then, Mr. Forster.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to add one point. In some of the occupations where we're struggling to recruit, there's a lot of that in Canada. If you live in rural ridings, you know how hard it is to get doctors, nurses, psychiatrists, dental technicians. The forces face the same challenge. So we're competing with private sector for pilots. We're competing with hospitals for great doctors. So we do face some of the same recruitment challenges that people in Canada face. And we have a very different kind of unique, many find it fantastically exciting and interesting career opportunity, but it is not for everyone. So that's some of the other challenges we face as well when we try to recruit people.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Forster. We'll now move to Mr. McColman, please, for 5 minutes. We're in the second round.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Forster, can I refer you to the Auditor General's report, page 1, because there has been talk on here today about, and your response has been, well, we cut 20 offices or whatever the number was. The 2002 report of the Auditor General, the 2006 report of the Auditor General identifies that there were systemic problems long before deficit reduction, closing the offices. Can you explain why those systemic problems existed in those two previous reports? You seem to be hanging your hat on one statistic, which is cutting offices, when the problem existed in those earlier audits.
So thanks for the question. Mr. Chair, I don't mean to imply that the problems we have in recruiting are solely due to the cuts that were made. I think as the Auditor General's report shows, it has always been a challenging area. I think in selecting the recruiting offices and recruitment as what we offered up to cut during deficit reduction, I think it just exacerbated the problem. I did not intend to imply that it was like the sole causal factor for that.
Well, it's been bandied around the table here as though it was, so I point that out. I point that out for the record.
Right. Well, that would be my error, and if I conveyed that, that's was not my intent.
Secondly, how does deployment in such in the field, in theater such as Afghanistan, and then withdrawal from deployment affect retention, or affect recruitment and retention in terms of the numbers. We're using a pretty generic number from what I read, that we need these many. But do you take into account any of the differing conditions, especially when we deploy people to theater?
Well, I can give you, without having the exact numbers in front of me, I can tell you this, is that being involved in an operation tends to draw recruiting. It helps it along because young men and women are interested by what is going on. And for a lot of them, it strikes at that sense of not only adventure, but a desire to serve Canada. We have to remember what led us into the war in Afghanistan is that our neighbors had been attacked and 24 Canadians were killed in those towers. And there was a surge of patriotism that was felt throughout the nation, I believe, and that did help us at the recruiting centers clear across Canada.
So,
sorry, if I can add a bit to that, we reached a point also where we had to increase the recruiting that we had to be able to sustain the number of deployments that we had. So during the period of 2006 to 2008 or thereabouts, we did an increase in our yearly intake to make sure that we had sufficient soldiers and airmen and airwomen and sailors who could go on these missions. And we were successful in doing that.
that's wonderful news in the sense that there is it isn't just a static number. It can depend on the situation. And I think, you know, in the discussion here, you know, we're using pretty static numbers when they really aren't that static, is what you're saying. What would it be of the high, so if I could ask for your confirmation, would the highest amount of percentage of people joining the forces would be when we deploy to Afghanistan? Is that what you're saying?
No, what I'm saying to you is that any time that there's a major conflict, you tend to have recruiting centers that are popular. We just recently celebrated the 100th for Vimy, and I can tell you there was a sound and clearing call and people responded. Same thing occurred in the Second World War, and same thing occurred during Afghanistan to a lesser level because it was not as large a conflict, but nonetheless we saw the benefits of that in terms of sheer recruitment.
So it would, you know, basic logic would then say, if we're no longer in Afghanistan, because we've withdrawn, the needs become somewhat less.
No. And we need to be clear about that. The needs for the numbers of recruits we have is not based on the conflicts in which we are involved. Right now we're involved in 19 different missions around the world. And of course, we are filling those mandates and those tasks given to us based on what the government has directed to us. So the numbers that we have in our establishment, trained, resourced, and everything like that, are based on what the government asks us to do.
So when we take on more responsibility, we have to bump those numbers.
It depends on how much responsibility. It's a definition of it.
Well, let's say going to Afghanistan.
So if I can actually just talk about the responsibility for the tasks we have, they're very clear in the Existence Defense Strategy what it is that we are expected to do. And those numbers are given to us, and those are the numbers to which we have to recruit, train, prepare, and have those people ready to go overseas. That's really what drives it.
Thank you very much. We'll go to Ms. Shanahan now for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much again to the witnesses for being here today. And I do want to explore those numbers a little bit more because I'm interested in comparing, I guess I would talk about a funnel, you know, the recruitment process, how many people come in, how they're onboarded, who drops out with. I'm thinking other forces, could be allies, or it could be, you know, the RCMP. So I'd like to get back to that. But before I do, I just want to say that I had the honor and the privilege of being a civilian instructor at Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu during 2006-2007. As you can imagine, I was not out in the field helping our soldiers. I was a financial instructor. And I was thoroughly impressed by the program that was in place at that time to help recruits and officers with financial pressures of being a soldier, which I'm sure we could go into more detail about what those are. It was, to my mind, state-of-the-art financial education, where I did find that there was a problem, and I tried to address it with my superiors at the time. This would have been in the PACP program, and I have no idea what they're doing now, but at the time, and I don't have to tell you, they were bringing in, I must have taught over 4,000 recruits in a 6-month period. They were coming in one door, and I have to say the saddest thing was when those who didn't make it had to go out the back door with their kit bags and take a taxi back to Montreal. That was sad. And one thing, I did not get a chance as a financial instructor, and I was working with some of the support personnel and so on, to do financial counseling, which actually I think was a big pressure. It's underreported, and I'm sure it's still a major issue today. A lot of the young folks, because someone mentioned earlier the clean credit record. Well, I don't have to tell you, there's been a generational change between when we were 18 and couldn't even get a credit card, and an 18-year-old today who's got like 14 of them. And so I'm just pointing that out. It was something I tried to address. I did actually, even after I left, to go and teach at McGill University, actually, in financial education. I did take it up with one of your ombudsman offices and so on. So I think some work was done there. But that was definitely a pressure that the individuals were reporting to me, and we did not have a way. There's a way you can get financial counseling once you're fully onboarded, but as a recruit, certainly the problem of delays would exacerbate that. So just want to get back now to that original question about the numbers coming in. What does that funnel look like? What's the drop-off rate? And certainly it sounds like you're getting to certainly the shorter time frame would go a long way in solving some of the financial problems that I witnessed.
Okay. First of all, thanks for your observations about the financial counseling, the financial education. It is something we recognize. And as part of our support program, there was an earlier question about, well, how is it that we support it? The CISA program and certainly long-term, the benefits that come from that include financial counseling. And one of the things that we do is we offer it up to have men and women who can provide that kind of advice to young people so that they can look after their financial well-being as well. I don't know the answer as to how soon that starts. I know that all of our recruits are pretty busy, and the recruit training courses are not that long in duration. So we're hoping they're not showing up with that much of a financial problem for the first 10 weeks of their career. But I know that they have access to these things. Second, for the actual numbers of the recruits that we bring in on a yearly basis and that we manage to train through, right now we're looking at 4,500 every single year that go there. And we have a plan to grow that because, of course, we're short on what it is. So over the course of the next 2 years, we want to raise that towards the 5,000 and then continue to meet the targets that we have. And, of course, that means that includes a full cycle of attraction, of how you bring them in, how you do the basic training, if you will, and then how you coordinate with the environmental chiefs and their organization. So if you're going to be an infantryman, you leave the organization that these gentlemen represent, and you go off to be trained at battle schools, if you will, that belong to the Army. Same thing on the air side, on the naval side. So we want to make sure that we have a good coordination with that so we can simplify that throughput. I'm going to stop right now and ask if, Andre, you have any other points you want to add about the recruiting numbers.
Fairly quickly, because our time is up, but I'll give her more time.
So roughly we get 44,000 people that apply to become a member of Canadian Forces. Last year we recruited 4,500 and a bit more. There are 405,000 and 4,542. And so we neck down from those 44,000 to that number of qualified, talented, motivated applicants to get into Canadian Forces. Why do they drop off? Various reasons. It's very hard to collect data because a lot of the time the applicant loses interest or stops his application file and we don't know why. Medical process, it's between the applicant and the medical chain. So getting hard data on how the funnel necks down is very hard to get.
Mr. Whalen, did you have a couple comments or? Thank you. Thank you. All right, Mr. Generou, we're back to you in 5 minutes.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair. Going back to some of the questions talking about earlier about recruitment retention, you mentioned in your opening comments that you compete with employers across the country, largely doctors, engineers, social workers. And then you also mentioned that now you're moving away from recruitment techniques such as advertising in newspapers and more to a social media. However, you're also reopening the recruitment centers. I guess help connect some of the dots here in my mind that are opening the recruitment centers and social media, is that largely for are these different demographics that you're looking at? And then when it comes to the doctors, engineers, and social workers, it would just some connection between all of this would be helpful.
So I just want to make a clarification. We're not reopening the 12 recruiting centers that were shut. What we're looking at with the inject of personnel is to make sure that the capacity that was lost along with the personnel who are manning it are there to help facilitating the processing of files for recruiting. So that's the first thing. And as far,
if you don't mind, so there's a recruitment center in Edmonton, my hometown, inside Canada Place. There was. Is that no longer open then?
It's still open.
It's still open.
Yes, that one's still open.
So there's some open and some not?
That's right. So 12 were reduced in 12-13, the years 2012-2013, those 12, and that resulted in some loss of personnel who had been manning them. And what we're doing right now is re-equipping the recruiting group with those personnel to be able to process files. There's been a shift also in how files are being processed. Earlier on, the question was asked about, the guy presenting himself, guy or the gal presenting themselves to do the recruiting. Now we encourage, and most of our recruiting hits come from online applications. That is how they're coming in to be seen. So I think that's important. If I could also talk just quickly, you were mentioning about how it is that you go and you get people specifically, and we have moved away from large newspaper advertising campaigns, quite frankly, because the research shows that where you get the most bang for your buck is going in through social media. But it's not unique. At the same time, we're doing other campaign efforts to make sure that we attract very specific groups. So we have groups that are working towards, or initiatives working to attracting Indigenous candidates to come work with us. And some of these programs like Bold Eagle and Raven are programs that are experiential. You bring them in for a period of time, you expose them to what the military does, you pay them while they're doing training like any other recruit, and then they get given the opportunity to participate in that. So experiential. We'll do the same thing with Women in Forces programs that are going to take place both in Borden and Saint-Jean, 2 pilot projects, one in August time frame, another one in the fall, where we're going to bring women to have a chance to see what it's like so they experience this as well. And finally, there's a tremendous amount of outreach that goes on within specialized environments. So for example, our Surgeon General has a 4-man recruiting team that looks specifically to recruit medical personnel, reaching out to medical faculties across Canada to let them know what it is that they have the opportunity to do by joining the Canadian Forces as medical people.
So that's the student's end of that. If my wife's a doctor, and so a little curious about this. Do you also do it through existing programs as well? Like say a residency program, doctors 10, 15 years of service?
So there is that opportunity. If somebody wants to be joining us right now, there's a bonus for them to join us as a general duty medical officer. And then after that, what we tend to do with these individuals, give them a specialty in family medicine, which is the good basin to prepare them to serve. But at the same time, if you have bone surgeons or anybody like that who'd like to join us, we're happy to take them.
Well, she's a general surgeon, so I'll pass that along to you. Quickly, I have about a minute left. I want to talk specifically about pilots. We talked a little bit last time you were here, Mr. Forster, about pilots and the type of fighter jets that were being procured or not procured, I guess, so depending on your opinion around the table. Does a long-term commitment to a specific type of plane impact the recruitment process positively or negatively? I guess, for example, a fighter pilot would know how to fly one type of plane, maybe not specialize in another type of plane. Does that factor into recruitment? Have we seen some uncertainty perhaps in that over the last few months maybe?
So we have not seen in terms of uncertainty, but you're right in that different planes require different qualifications. And we see some of our pilots that do travel through their careers and will fly different types of platforms. And at that time, we have to provide training for that specifically. As far as recruiting pilots, because that's the area of specialty that we're in, so we attract and we recruit them, the level of training that we provide is their basic training. So they become as basic training officers, and then the training that must be provided to them for specific platforms is provided by the Air Force. So that's an area that's more within the wheelhouse of the Commander of the Air Force.
Thank you, Mr. Lamar. We'll now move to Mr. Arya, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Ferguson, the Employment Equity Act says that designated groups includes women, indigenous peoples, visible minorities, etc. In the previous audit's findings, you had mentioned that there's no comprehensive plan to attract more applicants, particularly women, Aboriginal peoples, and visible minorities. In this current audit, did you examine the representation of designated groups other than women?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We did look at it from the perspective of updating our evidence from the 2002 and 2006 audits. We found that after those audits, there were programs that were put in place to increase the representation of Aboriginal peoples to try and increase their representation, and those programs were quite successful. So we have not continued to discuss those at this point. So I think that it is possible to actually increase the representation of these groups if the programs are targeted specifically to those groups.
In your view, that there is adequate representation of Aboriginal peoples and visible minorities in the Canadian Armed Forces?
I think that that is an area that continues to be a bit of a struggle, given trying to attract those people to the armed forces. I don't think that is an insurmountable problem as long as the programs are designed specifically for those groups.
My point was that you looked specifically into the representation of women, which is important. We all aim at gender equity. We need more number of women in Canadian Armed Forces, no question about that. But at the same time, Employment Equity Act also states that we have to look at the other designated groups. So my question was it looked? What is the current state of representation there?
So fundamentally what we ended up doing was focusing on the recruitment of women, because between 2002, 2006 and 2016 we didn't see any improvement. I think because we saw that there were some programs in place for the other groups and there seemed to be some progress, again, it's one of those scoping decisions when we are involved in an audit.
Yeah. Within women, did you look how many of them were from indigenous peoples or visible minorities?
No, we did not.
Okay. Mr. Foster, I'm glad that you have noted the statement by the Minister and the Chief of Staff that diversity is strength. We in the government, we are now asking major private corporations that they state their diversity policy. The bill is currently going through the process. So according to the bill, all major corporations have to state what their diversity policy is. And the government did not define diversity there, but at the committee stage, at my insistence and the insistence of my colleagues, we have included that the diversity policy cover the designated groups under the Employment Equity Act. I'm happy to note that your goal is to have indigenous people at 3.5%, and visible minorities at 11.9%, 11.8%, which is good. But what is the current status now?
We have the numbers here.
Yeah, sir, I can give you the actual numbers, what we have right now. So for women, 15%, for Indigenous population, 2.5%, and for visible minorities, 6.3%. Those are the numbers of what we're
so
tracking.
From 6.3% to go to 11.8% is almost double, so there's a big gap there. And I see that you have launched a campaign in the Facebook and LinkedIn. Have you targeted the ethnic media too? If you want to attract ethnic minorities, so it is required that they be reached out.
Yes, we are doing that, and that's actually the minister has driven us very hard to do that. He's one of the strong advocates for we need to get very focused and targeted in our recruitments if we're going to be successful. In those communities, we have to find leaders and spokespersons and champions.
Last question is on the bilingual requirements. Many ethnic communities, the English and French are the third and fourth languages.
Yes.
So there's a perception and an assumption that joining any government service, including Canadian Armed Forces, bilingualism is a must. Is that a is that a requirement?
No.
To be bilingual, sir? No. You don't need to be bilingual. What we want you to be able to do is to operate into one of the official languages. And of course, we provide training in the other official languages as well. And we do that based on where you are in your career path. But also, for example, a young Francophone soldier getting posted to Edmonton will have access to get language training there as an example, so he or she can operate properly in that environment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ariane. Mr. Lamar, we'll now move to Mr. Christofferson, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. We were mentioning pilots. Apropos, not this, I say so up front, but just to get it off my chest. I find it so crazy that pilots these days are being paid so little. I mean, Scully, the Miracle on the Hudson, at that time, he had to have a part-time job in order to pay the bills. This is crazy. Anyway, just wanted to say that. And the other thing I want to mention, since we're talking about wages and stuff when we talk about pilots, again, the number of vets that find it necessary and even active members to go to food banks continues to be an issue that jars a lot of Canadians. But that's not our focus today, and so I want to continue. And here's what I want to pick up, and I would ask colleagues to chime in if you wish, because I'm going to go into an area that's not clear, and you'll get it in a second. The report, the auditor's report, page 11, 5.55 says, since 2008, the recruiting group has been reduced by about 180 positions and has closed 13 recruiting offices, as has been said, as a result of budget cuts. So even the Auditor General is acknowledging that there were budget cuts that impacted that. And then under the response of the National Defence on page 9, where the recommendation is given about training and training capacity and recruiting, and it says, agreed. Quote, agreed, several years of reductions to recruiting and training capacity as well as shrinking advertising and marketing budgets contributed to the current levels of institutional capacity. And in a direct answer to a direct question, Deputy, you said bad idea. And here's where that takes us into this, and I even welcome your feedback in this, because this is us trying to perfect what we do. Normally, we don't get into the politics of was it a good idea or a bad idea. We go by what decision was made by the government or the minister. That was the direction. You were given the money. The Auditor General comes in after the fact to see did you follow the mandate you were given, and did you spend the money that you were authorized to spend? Did you do it effectively? And that's the accounting process. And we try to stay away from the politics. In fact, we work assiduously to stay away. And in this Parliament and the last one, in fact, it's been a few since we felt the need to bring in a minister or a former. And my friend, Mr. McColman, has said when you answered the bad idea, he immediately, and that gets us into the partisan stuff a bit, because he was part of that government, and said, well, wait a minute. A lot of these other problems were showing up in the 02 and 06 audits that Christofferson was bouncing off the walls about. So how could it be just because of the cuts? And here's the thing. If the cuts did directly affect your ability to carry out your mandate, we need to know that and factor that in, because that's not your fault. And yet, you're left with the business of being loyal to the minister and government of the day and not throw them under the bus. And if we did allow you to do that willy-nilly, every audit report would say, especially if there's been a change of government, well, it was the government that cut our funding or didn't let us do this, didn't let us do that, and it was the political side. We were great. They just didn't live up to their part of the thing. And so this is where we are right now. And it's difficult for us to discern how much of this was you managing as best you could with limited resources or money you thought you had and then it was taken away, versus the two earlier audits and Mr. McColman pointing out that there were systemic problems all along. So, I mean, I think it's something that we need to maybe talk about when we're in camera, about how we pursue this sort of thing. And I really, I don't have a question per se in this. I'm just pointing out that we don't normally get here where it's this black and white, but we are. And there's, even the report is saying that the cuts had hurt. So I'm going to move on to another question. I'll afford you a chance, Deputy, if you wish to comment on this, or you can just take a pass and I'll move on. But being wise, you'll take the time. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, it's just a short response. Just to maybe clarify my remarks, I don't have a problem with government saying we need to balance a budget, so all government departments need to tighten their belts. I think my point was and I wasn't there at the time in defense when we made the choices of what to cut. I just am commenting on the fact that at the time, probably with best intentions, they felt they could cut this area and manage still to recruit. And I think what the evidence has shown is we've cut the capacity to process people. Processing times got longer. Our ability to build the force got longer. And that's what, in hindsight, that probably wasn't one of our better choices of which area to cut. I have no problems with government telling us we all need to cut back to manage a budget and so on. So.
To be accountable when the totality of it is the system isn't working the way it should and Canadians don't have the defense that they should have. So
and my challenge right now is to go, I need to restore some of the capacity in the recruiting group to meet the recruiting levels we need to get to rebuild the force to hit the 68,000 on the regulars and the 28,500 on the reserves.
Thank you, Mr. Forster.
And that's my job as in charge of the resources, is to find the resources to allow them to do that.
Why they pay you the
Thank
big
you,
bucks,
Mr.
man.
Forster. And we'll now go back to Mr. McColman, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Christopherson, for a little bit of context. Because you're absolutely right. This is where we are. I guess since we're doing some introspective here, I had my own company for 26 years, small business, and there were times when there were great efficiencies that I could achieve in my operations by reducing my costs. And so I appreciate, Mr. Forster, you saying that and putting it in a better context. And the reality is that when I think it goes right to the nub of what this committee is all about. What we want is the appropriate resources in place at the most efficient cost possible to represent the people who elected us to this position, to be here, sitting here, and scrutinizing, just as the Auditor General's role is to do that as the lead-in for us to be able to interpret data that he's giving us. So I don't know where I'm heading here exactly on a question, but the reality is that's what the objective should be here. Take the politics out of it, if we can. It's not impossible. It's not always possible to do that, unfortunately. It's that. But when it starts to get tainted with, well, this year we didn't have a problem, that year we did because of these things, and we start to get that mixed into what the discussion has turned out to be today, it is, I think, to all committee members, it should be concerning that, that the comment was made that it was a bad decision. It may not have been that bad a decision, sir, at the time. It may have been the logical thing to do because you haven't reopened those offices, right? The resources needed to be replenished in a different way to be more cost effective. So, I just say that, and Chair, I'm really not leading to a question other than to give context to what to add a bit more from my perspective and where I was headed there. And so, there are appropriate times, as you've said, to make cuts for more efficiency. And there are times to replenish and to build back up. So any comments you might have to add a little more to it, Mr. Forster, I would appreciate.
Yeah. Mr. Chair, I totally agree with you. So we made a decision to close some offices. So that's going to save us some money on bricks and mortar. And as you've rightly pointed out, we're not about to reopen those offices. So if we thought that was the bad, a wrong decision, we would be reopening those offices. What we're seeing now is there are better technologies and ways to recruit people online, more targeted, where we would be better off spending our money. I think what I was more referring to was the capacity and the people we lost in being able to process applications and so on when we did those reductions. So I think there was elements, I would agree with you, I think there was elements of it instead of putting money into bricks and mortar and rent and heat and lights and yada yada, that we can focus it on the people that we need to process it, shorten our processing times. And as my earlier comments, clearly there were systemic issues that have been there for a while and not some that are part of it. This was one part of it in terms of reducing people in the recruiting group that can deal with people, process applications, and get them in the door.
Just for the record, how many recruiting centers do we have in the country? Bricks and mortar recruiting centers.
We have 6 recruiting centers, which are the headquarters of 24 detachments, plus 2 detachments that are open on a part-time basis, coming from the staff of those 24 detachments. So overall, we have 24 plus 2 detachments and 6 headquarters, which are recruiting centers sitting above them. And then my headquarters in Borden, which does national sort of issues dealing with recruiting. And that's what the footprint of the recruiting group is.
Thank you.
We'll now move to Mr. Chen.
Thank you very much. First, let me just start off by saying that I'm very proud of the incredible work that our brave men and women do in the Canadian Armed Forces, and I'm so pleased that we're all here today to talk about how we can build a force that is more inclusive, that is the best qualified to carry out the work. I want to start off with a little pet peeve. I did hear one of the witnesses earlier in referring to new applicants talk about his application, and I think it's very important for us to, as leaders of the department, to, especially in the context of talking about a more diverse, achieving gender equality, that we avoid pronouns that create the atmosphere of it being a male-dominated force. As much as it currently is, we want to move away from that. So with that said, I want to ask about Mr. Forster. You mentioned that the Canadian Armed Forces grew last year. Can you be specific? Were you speaking of the 2016-17 financial year? And if you are, what numbers? What are the total numbers for that year?
Yes, for last fiscal year, but I'll ask my colleagues what the growth was.
No, I apologize. Thank you. Whereas I was just actually reaching across to find out if we had the exact numbers of where we are right now. I don't have that exact number, unfortunately. It's failing on my part on this one. I should have had it handy. But what I will do is undertake to come back specifically with that accurate number of where we are. I can tell you right now that the actual numbers we have are 56,232 of what we call trained effective strength. Okay? So that's the actual number that I have for what we have in the hopper that can go on a mission today at a moment's notice. And in there as well, we have a basic training list so that people are yet to reach their occupational ready point, if you will. There's approximately 6,400 of those. And on top of that, we have another 1,500 of our members that are on the supplementary patient holding list. So these are men and women who at this point right now are suffering from an injury. They might have broken leg, they're recovering, so they can't yet deploy. Those are the numbers. So I'm giving you those numbers in terms of context of where we are. So there's certain cases of shortfall that we're aware of. But what I don't have really is the difference between yesterday, or last year rather, and the year today. So that's what I'll undertake to get you that number.
Fair enough. And to me, one of the most important numbers there is the number of trained and effective members, which is the 56,232. And there's a bit of a discrepancy that I've been trying to reconcile, because the Auditor General in his report, specifically in Exhibit 5.1, points out that over the past 4 years, we have actually seen a decrease of the number of members who are trained and effective. And that decrease has been year after year since 2012. And for example, from 2014-15, the numbers were 56.8 thousand versus the year following, 2015 to 2016, they were 56.3, and now you're saying they're 56.2. So I think it's important for us to contextualize the statements that we do make. It does sound good that the forces are growing, but we have, in fact, a lot of ground that we need to make up because of the 4 years of decrease, and as well, we're a bit far off from the 60,500 minimum that we would like to have in terms of fully trained members. Having said that, I want to continue on to in terms of what Mr. Arya mentioned with respect to visible minorities. It's wonderful that you have increased the number of women in the forces, 15.2% compared to 14% earlier this year in February. However, you have talked about, Mr. Forster, your work in fast-tracking women candidates to military colleges, expediting their intake. At the same time, however, we are trying to increase the number of Aboriginal and Indigenous members as well as visible minority members. So to me, these two initiatives can't happen in silos. In order to increase the numbers in both these areas, you need to take an intersectional approach. My question to Mr. Forster is, have you considered very targeted programs that specifically look at recruiting women who also are Aboriginal and Indigenous or from racialized communities?
Mr. Lamar.
Excellent. So you're absolutely right on many of your assertions, and I just want to talk about that in terms of the overall numbers. We are realizing that we're far behind. And when we talk about it, the 4,000 short, that's a big target for us to make up. I need to be open about it. As far as doing the intersection, are we making sure that we're hitting both the women, Indigenous, and visible minorities? They tend to work together in the approach that we have. But specifically, we also have engagements that are looking to encourage from all those segments. Let me explain that for you very well. When we're looking at Women in Forces program, it's open broadly to women who would come and sign up to come and have the experience with us. When we're talking about Bold Eagle and Rayville, we encourage women from those communities as well by engaging with the elders there to say, this is a program that's open to both men and women, and we want to see applicants from those things. And we do see a good turnout of women who come out for these Indigenous experiential programs, if you will, like Raven and Bold Eagle. So I'm satisfied we have that one. As far as the visible minorities, I don't know if we have the exact approach to say we're looking specifically for women from visible minorities, because from our point of view, we're not trying to grow that set group together. It's not as though the targeting we're trying to do is visible women, or correction, visible minorities and women are the specific targets. It's in each of those broad targets that we want to include the growth. So you're going to get a bit of a mix of both.
Thank you very much. Our time is up. Mr. Christofferson and then Mr. Massé.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate the opportunity for a couple more follow-up. I just want to pick up a bit on the sort of the conversation we're having, and I would just add to my comments to Mr. Coleman's that we are a committee about accountability and transparency, and at some point, if a government makes the political decision, which they're entitled to do, to go down an austerity road or a road of cuts, there's a price to pay for that. And somewhere in our system, that price has to be shown. And when the Auditor General can make a direct connection between objectives of a department and the funding, and by saying that the funding wasn't there, we need to take that into account. And it also works both ways. Those of us that have concerns about what austerity can do could also overplay that hand. Again, facts, facts, facts at a time when parts of the world want to go away from that are still the key thing. And so we need to have that discussion at some point to recognize that if damage is being done, then it's got to be accounted for somewhere. No government gets to hide it just underneath the carpet. It all has to come out. So you get the credit for cutting because you balanced your budget, but somewhere down the road there's going to be an Auditor General report that shows what happened when you made those cuts. That's part of accountability too. So I just leave that there. I wanted to go to page 9, point 550, and also 5.45. And I'm going to do it the other way around, actually. I'm going to do 5.0, and then 5.45. So overall, compared with the occupations, this is from the auditor report, we found, the Auditor General's Department found that the recruiting group was able to meet its overall recruiting target, which, by the way, was smaller than the needs identified by the regular force. So there was a study done to determine what the need was, and then they moved that target. And I think the General has said the reason that they did that was they didn't want to have targets that they knew they couldn't meet. But that still leaves us with a problem and a gap between what's identified as what we need and what we're even targeting for. So, having said that, they did meet their overall reduced recruiting target. However, the Auditor General is pointing out, and he says the word however, the recruiting group achieved this by enrolling more than the adjusted target in certain occupations. So they met the big number, and one of the ways that was done was by oversubscribing in certain areas. So I'd like some feedback as to what's the deal? I mean, that's, I got to tell you, what I wrote down when I read that the first time was, on purpose, question mark? I would hope not, but hey, so can you give me some, why on earth would you be, because it does beg the question, I'll put it this way, why would you overhire in one area if you don't need them, other than you want to make your target numbers, macro numbers, look good? I see a huddle. I'm waiting for an answer.
If you can just give me 1 second, I want to continue.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, take your time. We got 25 minutes. They don't know that.
Mr. Forster, maybe while the huddle is going on, you have...
Okay, sorry.
Here, we're back. We're back.
Oh, my apologies.
No, go
if
ahead.
I can, and I didn't mean to take away too much of the time. Part of it comes down to what it is that you are able to actually attract from the population as well. And sometimes when you're looking at that, you want to bring in people because you're a resource to bring in numbers. And when we're looking at the targets for occupations, it's usually over a 5-year cycle. So even though we might over-recruit in 1 year, it might actually be helping you in out years for when you're going to need a greater intake of those people. So 5-year targets are established through the annual military occupation review system. So that's one thing right there. And since you are a resource to have those things, you might as well recruit where you can and take in those folks because you know you're going to need them. Some occupations are not as attractive. Sometimes it's difficult to actually get folks in a given year to come and say, I want to be a hull tech. Because when you say hull tech, it doesn't sound nearly as attractive as a firefighter, as a fighter pilot, for example. So that's the reality of what we're dealing with in a system that is not bang on the number every single year, but it is based on 5-year windows of targeting, based on mathematical probabilities, mathematical modeling of seeing what it is we're going to have, knowing what historically was the number of people who got out every year or anticipating get-outs. So it really comes down to making sure that we can, over the years, continue to fill all of our occupations the ability we can, and some years you get more than others.
Thank you. I'll let you summarize very quickly because we do have extra time at the end with no other questions. Go ahead quickly.
Thank you. You know what I'd appreciate? I would like to hear the Deputy or you, General, just flat out say that you did not overhire in one area to inflate the macro numbers. I'd just like that flat out said and stated, please.
No, we did not overhire to inflate and to make the numbers look good. We have the capacity to hire certain numbers. We have the recruiting training system to put them through, to process them. And we know based on 5-year cycles of forecasting that we're going to need those people. So that's why we do this, to make sure that we can actually keep the machine going forward.
Yeah, no, I have one more question.
We're at 6.5 minutes.
What time do we adjourn normally?
5:30, but I want to make sure Mr. Massey, and then I can come back.
Oh, yeah, sure. I come back. I just don't want to be, I don't want to lose the chance. Sure,
Mr. Massey.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to ask my question in French. First, thanks to the Auditor General for an excellent work he's done with his team. I'd also like to thank all of the witnesses who are here with us today. I know all the work that goes into preparing for a meeting like this one. So thanks once again. Mr. Forster, You mentioned in your speech that your personnel currently has 15.2% women, and your target is 25% for women. So in 2015, the retired judge, Madame Deschamps, criticized in a report the culture in the Canadian Armed Forces that is, how do you say, is hostile to women, and that it favored sexual harassment. Mr. Vance, at the time, to respond to this report, set up an operation to put an end to this culture. He clearly said that his objective was to achieve zero tolerance. There is a recent report to see if there was progress done on this aspect, and according to this report, the progress was not as much as what was wished, because women are still victims of sexual harassment. So I have two parts to my question. First, if this situation, which has been criticized, has a significant impact on the recruitment of women in the Canadian Armed Forces, does it? And secondly, what are you doing? What strategy do you have in place to continue the work that you've started with the honor operation? So I'll start. I would like to talk about the report that you mentioned. The General Vance himself provided an update about the situation to say what the current situation was. I'm sorry. I know the terms in English.
Being taken specifically to ensure that that culture of op honor, where you don't have any tolerance whatsoever for harmful sexual behavior, inappropriate sexual behavior, is being inculcated throughout the Canadian Armed Forces. And I think that's an important aspect of which we're starting to see some of the results, and it's important to mention it. Every single course that we offer, leadership or basic course in the Canadian Armed Forces, has a segment specifically related to make sure that people understand that this is not on. That includes every single 4,500 Canadians who get hired in the Canadian Armed Forces must go through this training to ensure that it's understood. This is a yearly recurring thing because we bring in 4,500 and more to come into the Canadian Armed Forces, so we undertake to do that. We have also put in place systems that are there for all the members that are already within their lines, so that every single year there's training that's undertaken to ensure that that goes forward to eliminate that harmful and inappropriate sexual behavior. So I'm confident that we're going in the right way. The other indication of what's going on there too is that 77 individuals are going to be released because of exactly that. They have done some things that were just not appropriate, and the justice system with the Canadian Armed Forces and the administrative disciplinary system is taking care of that. Now, that said, when you have these things that are occurring in the media being reported, it does pause, of course, and have an effect, if you will, for the population as a whole. And one of the key messages we want to have out there is the fact that we are dealing with this situation in a very aggressive manner, and a program that is being institutionalized like few other places are having institutionalization of this kind of program to clear up, if you will, and to change the culture. So that's an important aspect. And I think that it will come to a point where folks are going to say that if there is a problem, it's going to be dealt with. We have just recently seen some reporting, because we conduct studies, and as Ms. Truscott was just alluding to, we conduct studies by which we actually go in and have your says, or we ask people for unit life surveys, where we say, what is going on in your unit, and what's your level of confidence with this being dealt with? And this is something that we will have to publish, because it talks to a high level of confidence within our unit that if there is an issue that is arising, that the chain of command will deal with it. This is coupled, of course, on top of all the other initiatives that are taking place related to op honor, which includes, of course, training our police force specifically to deal appropriately with investigations, to make sure that they keep on digging and don't dismiss things, making sure that they go through a very detailed process of proper investigation for those events.
Do you think that the evaluations that you conduct on the progress and the strategies that you've implemented have a positive impact on the recruitment of women? And do you think that in the general population, has understood and heard your message to make it easier to recruit women in the armed forces? I don't know. I would like to ask Madame Truscott, because there were studies conducted specifically on the impact of recruitment. So I'll ask her if she has this information. But I would like to underline the fact that yes, it is a challenge somewhat, but when we implement a program to eliminate this type of behavior, that naturally in the beginning, especially since we're just at the very beginning of the program, all sorts of things can happen. Some people would like to say we're moving forward, even though several years ago in the past, we conducted investigations and examinations. Sometimes victims only find the courage to speak up later on in life, and that's when we have to deal with the situation.
Very quickly, we're 2 minutes over.
I would just note that our most significant issue in attracting women, visible minorities, and Aboriginals is in fact the lack of awareness of the Canadian Forces and the lack of knowledge. So the advertising and marketing campaigns and the social media activities that the Deputy Minister spoke about are most significant. We do know from our studies that when they understand the organization and the almost 100 occupations that are available, that about 30% more women express an interest in joining. So the most important factor for us right now is getting out and enhancing awareness and knowledge of the Canadian Forces.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Massey. Go to Mr. Lefebvre and Mr. Christofferson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Merci. Monsieur Demers, un peu plus tôt, vous avez dit qu'il y avait...
Mr. Demers, earlier you said there were 4,000 applicants every year? Yes, more or less. And you also said that you increased this number by 4,000 in the regular forces every year? What I said is yes. No, we're short 4,000 people right now. How many people or soldiers or people in the army leave the force every year? That depends, in general. Generally, roughly 4,500 leave every year. This percentage varies by 7 to 8% annually, and it also depends on the external market. So, if someone leaves, you said you roughly retain 10% or 4,500? So there's a shortfall. Do these 4,000 only replace the 4,000 that leave? So of the 44,000, you said there was a challenge because some people leave and some people aren't as interested in staying in the forces. But just by improving the way you can communicate with these 44,000 people and improve their the services you give to them, it seems to be in your interest, in the interest of Canadians to do so. Is there a way you can improve the way you provide service, which could improve the situation? Absolutely, yes, and that's why we're working on this particular issue right now. We're trying to improve our services and to see how we can better hire people on social media, etc. You can create a profile on our recruiting site. Doesn't automatically mean that this person will be a good candidate for the Canadian Armed Forces. Thank you.
Mr. Christofferson, please.
Thanks, Chair. So, I want to return to the issue just briefly of 68,000 being how many you determine you need, and we're short that. Again, the Auditor General's report, 5.11, overall, we found that the total number of regular force members had decreased and that there had been a growing gap between the number of members needed and those who were fully trained, although I think you've got up-to-date information that says you think you're turning that. The information we have at the time of the audit is that number is growing. Further, in 5.17, in our opinion, meaning the Auditor General, and I'd raised this earlier, it's unlikely that you'll be able to recruit, train, or retain sufficient personnel to meet its target of 68,000 members by 2018-19, and anybody who wants to can see a very effective chart at the top of page 5, Exhibit 5.1 that shows the trend line down and the gap growing. Here's my question. Why aren't you freaking out more? And here's why. When you were explaining that you lowered the target to make sure that it's reasonable, okay, I accepted that for that go-around. But here's the more macro question. Either 68,000 is 4,000 more than you need, or you're leaving us vulnerable. Now, I don't expect, and I'm not going to ask you to get into the vulnerabilities in a public setting. But I think it's fair to ask, if you've determined 68,000 is the number, and that's the number we need, and we're not meeting it, just by artificially lowering the number so you can be more realistic about how you're going to fail to achieve 68,000, still leaves us vulnerable. I'd like you to comment on that vulnerability, please.
Thanks very much for the chance to comment on that. I'm not freaking out because I know that we have a job to do and we are going to do it. So I'm comfortable about that. And the other thing is, too, is that when we're saying very openly right now, and we agree with the Auditor General's comment that we're short in 4,000, it's because the problem is there. So at this point, what we need to be able to do is to address that and come up with a plan that is going to get us those 4,000 to bring us up. And put the resources to it, as the Deputy Minister was just mentioning, to make sure that we can have success and bring those numbers up to the 68,000. It's not a short and easy task either, because of course you're still dealing with all the issues that are there. But that means that we do need to do things significantly differently, as Mr. Lefebvre was telling us and considering us to do, and that's exactly what we want to do.
Okay, a statement, and it'll take less than a minute, Chair. I just wanted to make a reference to page 7. At the top, where the department is talking about the following initiatives have been or will be initiated before the end of 2016. I just assumed this was probably written, because these things are lagged, it was written last year. Then the next paragraph, I won't read what comes after that. Then the next paragraph talks about other initiatives that'll be well underway in 2017. And referring now to the last, just before the conclusion, it says, there were to be implemented gradually. The new plan in 2009. You had a new strategy to retention, and they were to be implemented gradually from 2009 to 2011. We, the Auditor General, I'm quoting, were informed that action had been taken for some individual projects, but that the strategy had not been fully implemented. In 2014, the Canadian Armed Forces Retention Working Group planned to develop a revised retention strategy to be implemented by June 2018 using 2009 strategy as the base. So I'm assuming if you're using 2009 that the strategy was good, but you didn't have the funding to make it real, and that by June 2018 you should have everything caught up. I just want to leave with you that this would probably and potentially be a prime candidate for us to ask you to come back in the fall and tell us exactly how well you're doing. I do not want to wait another few years for another audit report that might point out a problem. If we've got one, we need to see it early. Conversely, if you're finally hitting targets in this area, then it's an opportunity for us to give you the kudos that you'll deserve. Thank you for your indulgence, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Christopherson. There's no other real questions coming from committee, although I do have just a couple comments and a couple of questions. I'm very fortunate enough to have CFB Wainwright in my constituency. And first of all, I'll say that we were very saddened last week with an accident at CWB Wainwright and Sergeant Robert Dinarowitz, who was killed. He was an armored crewman with the Canadian Dragoons based out of Petawawa, and I know that the whole base supports his family, and certainly we pass our sympathies along. Now, having Camp Wainwright in my constituency, I've also attended many of the graduations there. And I'll tell you, there's nothing that really brings as much pride to everyone involved, not just a member of Parliament when you see these individuals graduating, but to their families. And one of the programs that they have that you have referenced today is the Bold Eagle program. And, you know, it became so obvious with the number of First Nation graduates that we saw going through that program, how much pride their families took in the fact that their children, their cousins, their brothers and sisters successfully went through this program. And it just seems to me that when we're talking about recruiting, that, you know, given that there is such a great deal of pride amongst our First Nations when their children are serving in the Canadian military, that are we doing enough to target that? Like social media, yes, I get it. But is there other ways, more specifically with our Indigenous people, that we're connecting with them? Because when you watch them at graduation, if you could have a recruitment office sitting right there that day, you would have brothers and sisters of those graduates signing up. So maybe there's just a couple comments on other innovative ways to see some of our very important Indigenous people serve with the Canadian forces. Mr. Lamar.
Thank you so much. First of all, for Wainwright, for one place. I mean, I've spent enough time there that I feel like I'm one of your constituents, so it's a great opportunity. But as far as the engagement, you're absolutely right. I was just recently at Vimy Ridge. I was fortunate enough to be there for the 100th, and Chief Perry Bellegarde was there as well. And he and I had a chance to have a bit of a pull-aside, and I asked for a chance to come and meet him. Because part of the key things that we need to do in here, and it's referred to, is that we want to have an advisory body that can help us, specifically when we're looking for either visible minorities, Indigenous people, or women. And so part of the mandate that I have as Chief Military Personnel is to be engaged with those groups and those advisors who can help us specifically to reach into those targeted areas to find out how we can be most effective. So certainly, I'm only 4 weeks into my job here as the Chief of Military Personnel Command, but that is one of our key things, is to establish that advisory body so we can reach in and not just trust ourselves to how we're doing it on an attracting marketing advertising system, but get that advice from the senior leaders. When you refer to people who are so proud to see their kids register, I certainly believe that, you know, and to be part of the program like Bold Eagle, I know the fact that if we had a recruiting office there, not only would we get the sisters and the brothers and the kids sometimes, but we'd probably get the parents too. And we want to do those things because we hire folks of pretty well a large range, if you will, of ages, including into their 40s and everything else, because they can come and do service for us. So if any of you leaving this place are interested, certainly I would be as well.
I think that, you know, and I appreciate those comments. Maybe there are ways that members of Parliament, as we go to schools, you know, we talk about the importance of an education and, you know, getting into some of these other careers, but maybe there's a better way that members of Parliament, as they meet with their high schools, or, you know, whether it be at not trade shows, but certainly counselors in high schools that are trying to encourage that it's not a second choice. It could be a first choice among so many young Canadians. And maybe there's resources that you have or you could give to members of Parliament so they can put that forward as they go into a lot of their schools. So in a way, I just a suggestion. I also want to say that there's been good questions today, and I appreciate all those who have asked those questions. And I know that we are going to wait on some of the answers to come back. You've already stated that you look forward to coming back. There's no need to come back other than what Mr. Christofferson said, perhaps in the fall. But if you leave here and you go back and you have those numbers or those answers, please just email them to our clerk, and he will see that our analysts get that, and anything that goes into a report, it could include those answers very much as well. So thank you very much for being here today and for the good work that you do, and all the best as you implement some of these programs to help us meet some of the targets for our Canadian Armed Forces. So thank you all. We are now adjourned.
Thank you, Mr.